The first thing that did happen to me in that house was the witnessing of a full-bodied apparition. That's a little girl. It looks like a little girl. It acts like a little girl. She must belong to a family in the neighborhood. No, she didn't belong anywhere near there. And she certainly wasn't a little girl. It wasn't until I got my feet wet into this field that I realized that no, 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 no. A lot of this, at least the darkness, it all comes to a head. It all seemingly obeys and works hand in hand with the source.
Today, we're diving into the edge of the paranormal. What happens when the ghost in the machine is real and it wants a body? According to my next guest, they can mimic almost anything. My guest is demonologist and researcher Nathaniel Gillis. He's one of the few people mapping the intersection between high strangeness and modern technology. Stay tuned.
The world keeps lying, but he won't retreat on his quest for truth. Yeah. Truth, quest for truth. They can't stop me, they can't block me. Moving through, got that fire, they can't block me. Quest for truth, breaking chains, making waves. That's what I do. When they hate, I create.
Welcome to the show, Nathaniel Gillis. Nathaniel, please tell people what they should know about you.
Oh, good Lord. That's quite a loaded question. Well, obviously, as you well know now, my name is Nathaniel Gillis. I'm an author, researcher, lecturer, and experiencer. I am doing my best to understand the phenomenon, the threat that it represents to us as a species, and any and all tools we have at our disposal to push the beasts back into the darkness. I'm primarily known for my research in demonology and the interconnectivities it has to ufology, our perception of reality, and a new field that I've created called Necronetics. One of my leading theories now is that whatever the Nephilim were, is that they are inhabiting a species on this planet and using them to self-replicate their own. And so people get kind of weary of that, right? Their ears get perked, their concern is raised because they hear necro and netics combined. But I do believe that whatever we're dealing with is a species of practitioners on this planet that have often been confused with the demonic or entities that they replicate. And so that's primarily what my research is centered around. Other than that, I love Frasier, the show, and I enjoy a good football game and some good chicken wings. So that's really me in a nutshell.
Very cool, man. Well, I appreciate your work, and I saw you on an interview not long ago, and we talked about this a little bit before the show on the Confessionals podcast with Tony Merkel, and it was fascinating. And you mentioned, I guess, this necrometrics. Is that what you call it?
Necronetics.
Necronetics. And
Yeah.
that was like fascinating to me what you were actually talking about on there. And I really want to kind of dig into what you're talking about because this UFO phenomenon, the abduction scenarios that are taking place seem to have ramped up and people seem to be experiencing these things, but it's also left a lot of skeptics and stuff. And I'd love to hear how you have found this stuff out and where your research has taken you through all that.
So there for a while, well, I guess I should start with this so that we can kind of move into a different area. But my origin story is as follows. I grew up in the church. Of course, my father is a pastor today, and he was a pastor then, but or he was a minister at that point, rather. But I grew up in a church environment. My dad became a pastor at the age of, I think it was like 17 years old. But anyways, I grew up in a haunted house, and it was an extremely violently active environment with respect to the paranormal. There were nights when I would be induced into a dreamlike state to where it was almost sleep paralysis, but I was in a looping nightmare, if you will. In this nightmare, there was drug abuse present. There was self-hurt present to the worst extent imaginable, and I'm trying to skirt around that so nobody gets demonetized. Right, I do care about that. So, but anyways, it was at that moment, where you think that the end of the dream is upon you, right? You're going to wake up, you're going to gather your emotions, get a drink of water, go back to bed. That would not happen. I would literally start and end with a dream, but the end was the beginning. And so it was just a snake eating its own tail, if you will. And so at the time of the phenomenon's choosing, it would release me and I would wake up from that looping nightmare and all of my energy would be drained from my body. Mentally, I was broken. Emotionally, I was shattered. And I just felt just drained is the best way to put it. Like something had fed upon me. And the phenomenon evolved, you know. I mean, the first thing that did happen to me in that house was the witnessing of a full-bodied apparition. And then I thought, okay, that's a little girl. It looks like a little girl. It acts like a little girl. She must belong to a family in the neighborhood. And then once we moved into the house, no, she didn't belong anywhere near there. And she certainly wasn't a little girl. My point, though, is that at the time I was experiencing these phenomena, I, as an experiencer, had compartmentalized them, even as a 9-year-old boy, thinking that the voices I heard above me talking at night were separate intelligences than the apparition. And both of those were completely different than the cloud hovering in the darkness.
Mm.
And then it wasn't until I got a hold of demonological literature, and then after that stage, I began to do home investigations. It wasn't until I got my feet wet into this field that I realized that no, 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 no. A lot of this, at least the darkness, it all comes to a head. It all seemingly obeys and works hand in hand with a source, and that this intelligence is a life form. And a lot of what we consider as paranormal activity is the way it sustains itself. Those are two different data points, by the way. And the third one, and this is a key point that really opened my eyes, is that whatever they are, they believe they deserve to be worshiped. It's not a figment of their imagination, right? It's not them playing the role of something. No, for some reason, in their psychopathy, in their profound, gross narcissism, they believe they deserve worship. And so there for a period of time, for about a decade, I was kind of alone doing my research. You know, I of course, I love Tom Horn. I love Stephen Quayle. I love Rob Skiba. I love, my goodness, there's so many, Michael Heiser, Chuck Missler. The list goes on and on. And then I went into abduction literature, Bud Hopkins, John Mack, Dr. Carla Turner. And that's when I realized that whatever we're dealing with is extremely capable. And even the questions I began asking are no longer the questions I'm asking now. Whatever we're dealing with is something deeper and darker, and it has a control mechanism in place. By the time we actually understand what we're interfacing with, it has the ability to commandeer our own consciousness, not just to manifest to us, but to manifest through us. And so it was at that point that I got an invitation to go to England and lecture alongside of the leading parapsychologists in the world. And again, I'm coming from my worldview, from my perspective, and what I know of and experienced. And then they set me down in England, and one of them looked right in my face and said, Nathaniel, they want to be worshiped. And that was when my world changed, because it's one thing, you know, to be on coast to coast, to do a lot of podcasts. It's another thing to actually sit with somebody who's been in the field longer than you've been alive, who doesn't even have the same worldview you do, right? By the way. And even they said, hey, by the way, here's what we know. Forget about what we think. Here's what we can prove. And so that's when everything came to fruition in my career. And I had to make a serious decision. Do I want to continue pursuing this research? Because, you know, I'm a single guy. I'm 37 and I'm single. I have very few friends. I do not have children, you know. And so at this point, I had to make a decision. Do I want to continue the research and provide the most value I can to the people I love, which is my species? Right? Or, you know, and by the way, I can't do that with a family. You know, most of the people I work with, they don't have families because this phenomenon as you probably well know, will target those you love.
Yeah.
So that's when I put everything together, and I made a conscious decision to do what I'm doing now.
Yeah, you're right, man, on that. That is really an important thing to really think about. And that's something that I had to think about. I mean, I have children, and like there was a line of research I was going because,
Hmm.
like you, from early age, I would have the same reoccurring dream. And every time before it was sleep paralysis. And I felt like I was being like I felt like demons were around me. It was really
Yeah.
crazy. And from that age, I've always had the wonder of like what all this stuff is. And I kind of get down research, and I realize there's these stopping points that I have to look at.
Yeah.
And somebody like you, though, that's willing to do this, to kind of put yourself on the line, I
Mhm.
totally understand that. And I think in the Bible, I won't remember if it was Paul or Peter, but it says it's better for you not to be married, for
Yes, Paul. Yeah.
for that mission purpose, because what you're doing, you're right, man. This stuff is so real. People have no idea unless they've been on the verge or on the right over the mark. They have no idea of what they're dealing with. So please continue.
It's funny, it really is because doing these podcasts, I have insomnia a lot of times. And so I get these bags under my eyes, and people are like, Nathaniel, where's makeup? And crazy comments. They don't realize, like, yeah, I don't get a lot of sleep. I really don't, for whatever reason. But yeah, and I do believe a part of that is the phenomenon. That's
Yeah.
the reason I brought it up. But here's what I would like everybody to understand. Number one, whatever we're dealing with, it's almost fighting for control of reality, not just our perception of it. And number two, that the evidence suggests that these entities cannot create matter. They can only manipulate it, even the reports they're manifesting. It's almost like they can replicate them, but they can't replicate them on the atomic level. The isotopic ratio is different than real matter or that which it should be made of. And so it's pretty much exactly what the demonological literature says. It lines up exactly with that theory. The question now, though, is what are they capable of? If you go back into early ufology, we have people like Albert Bender, and we have individuals who approach ufology through the scientific materialist worldview. And once they realized that the phenomenon had hijacked that worldview, had created the materialist nuts and bolts field of ufology as a smokescreen to hide the fact that this entire narrative, not the narrative, this intelligence is trying to initiate experiencers over and over again. And so the research I and others are doing now is where it's like almost again replicating reality or fabricating technology in the guise of technology, offering it to practitioners. But once they get their hands on it, it's not real. I'm talking about metamaterials that are self-assimilating. And then once you get your hands on them, they just basically dematerialize into nothing. And so Richard Bandrick, who is now a CEO of an aerospace company, 40 years ago, he was contracted with our federal government to go out and look at gifting fields where the phenomenon was gifting our species with, quote, technologies. And he held these metamaterials in his hand. He said they blended in with their environment. But if you held it in your hand for longer than 10 seconds, it would just devolve and dissolve into nothing. And so his perception and conclusion was that there's something out there that's wanting to manipulate our species. And that is an ancient narrative where a lot of this technology appears to be technology, but it isn't. And so at the end of the day, what we're realizing here is that there are members of our federal government that have aligned themselves with these powers, that are bending the knee, building the altar, in exchange for technologies that may or may not be real. And so, in that environment, there's some kind of symbiosis present to where at the end of the day, I want worship, I want sacrifice, I want everything that you would give, right, to demigods in antiquity, uh, and I'll give you this little trinket. And it's worrisome because I do believe, and the evidence is there, that our federal government, at least members of them, it are in covenant with these things. And a lot of the technology we're seeing is coming from whatever they are, right?
Yeah, it really does seem that way. And I interviewed Thomas Winterton from Skinwalker Ranch. He's the guy that
No.
in the first season, I think he had to go to the hospital because he got like beamed in the head with energy, and he's on the ranch all the time. And
Yep.
the phenomenon that they were experiencing, such as the drones, I don't know if you saw that episode. There was 500 drones in the air.
Hmm.
All of them pretty much fell except for a couple that had different GPS systems that were Russian and Chinese, but they
Hmm.
all acted outside of their geofence, but yet they were staying right there, and there was this weird stuff going. And you mentioned this intelligence, and my question to
Yep.
you is, where do you draw the line between what is technology and what
Hmm.
is paranormal? Because to me, they seem like they may be the same thing at this point. It seems like they're merging
Hmm.
to be the same exact thing. So I'm interested to know your thoughts
Hmm.
on that before we continue.
Well, whatever we're dealing with, again, this is why when people try to pigeonhole me, Nathaniel, just say they're unclean spirits. Just say that. We're done, right? We'll buy your books, Nathaniel, if you say that. I'm going to be very transparent with you here. We're dealing with is something more meticulous and more methodical. I think it's unclean spirits and, right? Not or, and. It's that and something. Um, uh, and I'm not saying again that these are separate sources. I'm saying that that model is correct, but what we're dealing with is deeply technological. One of my mentors and dear friends is Steve Mera in the UK, and him and Barry have been having cases of apports manifesting in homes. Literally, the phenomenon materializing objects in this reality. That's not an unclean spirit. Again, right? These are placeholders that we as a species use to describe phenomena. Now, again, I'm not denying their existence. I'm not denying that they're present in that model. I just think that whatever we're dealing with is almost use that as a scapegoat to obfuscate the real technological advancements they're using. I mean, again, it's even getting in demonology, the age-old argument was, well, they'll manipulate your perception of reality. Okay, whatever we're dealing with, again, it's supporting things where it's just like, okay, here's this. It looks like you own it. It looks like you bought the one. Like this is what you bought, but you didn't buy this one. It took the one you bought, replaced it with a replica, and we as a species would never know the difference. And so whatever that is, it's highly technological. That is not an apparition of an AirPod. You know, it's not. That's a literal object you can feel, you can measure, you can quantify. And what we're realizing now is when we do feel, measure, and quantify it, they appear to be a part of our reality, but they're not. And so the phenomenon is doing what it did in demonology. It's anchoring itself to apports. And so we see that again, not just in hauntology, but even in demonology with the worst, most malevolent possession cases, where once this intelligence is forced to evacuate, or when it chooses to, it will materialize small objects out of the cavity of the demoniac. And our exorcists will say, well, those are occult connections. Why? Because they're haunted objects. That's our terminology. What they're really trying to articulate to the best of their ability is that the phenomenon has supported and materialized an object, attached its presence to it. So it's anchoring itself in this environment. So that's another pathology we need to understand in the field is that when it wants to preserve itself, it replicates. Now it's replicating by virtue of apportations and hybridism. Same mechanism. And so when you look at that, you kind of take a step back and realize that, yeah, these are not separate phenomena. It's a singular intelligence, a singular source that's masquerading as all of these entities, from my perspective, in order to sustain itself, to be present with, but absent from. Now, take it a step further, if I may. That means, uh, number one, that we're not just dealing with the ports. We're dealing with the phenomenon creating physiological constructs when interfacing with us. Now, I've had cases where people have conversed with girlfriends, ex-girlfriends. It's never her. Looked like her, An actual construct was created of her, not her. And so right now in the field, what we have, even with Jacques Vallée and Giorgiani, is this idea that there is the trickster and then there's the nuts and bolts. Those are two separate phenomena. I think that there is an issue with that phenomenology because as researchers, we were not prepared for a phenomenon, an intelligence that will materialize, will be nuts and bolts, and then materialize a construct right next to it, to where when we consciously connect to it, once we observe it, it collapses itself into a construct. And thereby, what we see is not always what's present. And so we've seen that not just in hauntology with apparitions, where, oh, it's an apparition with our eyes, but on camera, it's a ball of light. We've seen that with Skywatcher now, and it's virtually everywhere in the field. But what that means also is that they're not two separate entities. There's not the trickster archetype, right? And then it's the nuts and bolts. It appears to be both. And there, I believe that's why once we latch onto it, we see one thing and something else is actually there. That would, in my opinion, lead people to believe, of course, right? No, they're two separate entities. No,
Yeah. Yeah.
one.
Yeah, they're merged. It definitely merged. In order for these entities to manifest, it seems like they need technology. So that would make sense why they're
Yeah,
manifesting this technology on these fields that you're talking about.
yeah,
And pretty much everybody that I've met or talked to from Hollywood or from the Silicon Valley world, these
hmm,
people all agree that part of their rituals is to take large amounts of like ketamine and things like that
yeah,
and try to channel demonic entities in order to, manifest whatever they're doing. And so
yeah,
my question is, how long have they been doing this? I mean, because it doesn't seem that before the, of course, just to preface this, I
mhm,
realize that history's been rewritten probably many, many times over, but it doesn't seem that before the 1800s or 1900s you had too many people in high levels like government that are able to
mhm,
pump billions and trillions of dollars into uh, pulling from these entities. But I mean, do you think that
yeah.
might be what's going on, or what's your
I
thought?
do believe that's what's going on. I mean, in terms of our federal government contacting them, yes. Um, Believe it or not, the foundation of this country is not on billionaires. It's not rooted again. Sure, democracy and the republic is present, but if we get down to it, we're still consulting mages, still going to oracles. And there's a division, right? Which oracle you go into? Which God do you believe in? And basically, that right now is the structure of disclosure. It's going on right now in the federal government. Even on Twitter, people are going at it. Okay, are you against the Collins lead or not? Are you against this kind of research or not? And so I think at some point people are going to have to choose which data set they're going to believe in. But my point here is that whatever we're dealing with I believe, that has been here since the dawn of recorded history, probably even prior. And it's never, and this is unique, it's never changed what it wants. I can go back into T. Whitten Davies' research and demonology in the ancient Near East, where at first blush our species believed these individuals to be deceased ancestors who were divinized. And so at one point in history, you had the altar built for a demonized ancestor or a divinized ancestor. And so you see the splitting. Okay, I'm going to worship the demonized ancestor, which was the ghost or mutated consciousness. And so that was one theory. Not that it's true, that's just what some people believed. My point, though, is that they too wanted altars and offerings. And so, whatever we're dealing with, it's never changed its pathology. Hybridism, it's the same reason hybridism is present through all of antiquity. It's still in 2025. It's not just in demonology, it's in ufology. The only thing that has changed is what we're calling them. That's it. Yeah, and there has been an orchestrated effort, specifically within secular ufology, to call these entities extraterrestrial. Now, the problem with that is if we look at the phenomenology, the first time we contacted them in modernity was through seance. That's not a fabrication of Nathaniel's mind. I can be crazy. I'm not gonna be. I'm just telling you. They were contacted through seances. George Hunt Williamson, a homemade Ouija board, contacts extraterrestrials until multiple voices come out of his body at the same time. So, again, what are we dealing with here? I'm more focused on the function now, not on the form, because realizing that the phenomenon can take whatever form it wants to, and that's not how we're going to be able to test the spirits.
It's like Tron, man, or the new Tron Ares. Have
Yeah,
you seen that? I mean, my
I have it,
goodness.
buddy. It's in my
Uh,
my queue now. I'm gonna have to watch
Dude,
it.
this is like exactly, I mean, I'm not going to give away
Hmm.
any tidbits of it, but I'm like what you're saying here thoroughly reminds me of exactly what was happening in this movie. And man, it's
Hmm.
crazy to think about, but I do believe that I happen to run across some people. I sometimes I have the absolute blessing of meeting some of the most interesting people that I've ever met in my life. And like
Hmm.
last month, I met a guy, but they work with frequencies. And so, like, the idea
Yeah.
of frequencies being able to materialize human form or anything like that is not something they were doing. But like, this is
Hmm.
something that, like, by judging what their work is without exposing anything like that, it
Hmm.
seems that this is what they're trying to actually duplicate is
Yeah.
maybe a human form of some sort that something can manifest inside, a
Right.
frequency can manifest inside. So it makes you wonder what are frequencies? How do we even like are we as humans even should we even be messing with these things is what I wonder, because it
Right.
seems that we're getting closer and closer to a point in time where I mean, we're probably already there. Judge off some of your research, we're probably already there
Yeah.
to a point in time where we're not going to be able to trust anything in front of our eyes. And I already feel that way when I look at my phone.
You're right. And we were told that very explicitly in the text. First of all, test the spirits. So it's never, okay, believe in what they appear to be. It was quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. And it was, okay, how do we test them? And so that's more of my interest as it is today. But getting back to this concept of the phenomenon grooming their perception of the experiencer, in the interview you mentioned earlier, I discussed with Tony how my friends Barry and Steve had actually attached a brainwave monitoring unit to a CE5 practitioner. Now, before I go into that case study, again, all of the literature, even if it's fairy lore, even if it's demonology, incubi, all of that, it points to the fact that when we're interfacing with the phenomenon has the ability to weaponize our own vision against us, to blind us by what we can see. And so, somewhere in that interface event, we're induced into a trance like state, involuntarily, by the way, right? We don't want it to happen, but the phenomenon has that ability. And so, believing that to be the case, at least from the literature, they went out, took a C5 practitioner, said, okay, educated by Stephen Greer, we want you to go and go through their protocols. And this individual did. As the phenomenon manifested above their heads in the sky, this individual's focused, right, enamored by the glamoring of the light phenomena. Well, they're focused on the phenomenon in the sky. Barry and Steve are focused on the brainwave activity because they knew we have too many accounts of this occurring where people over and over again say, I was almost put to sleep. My fight or flight was shut off. I was just paralyzed in its presence. And so within, I think it was like 24 seconds, the phenomenon had induced this individual into theta brainwave activity, captured them completely.
Mm.
And it's at that point that people need to realize that in demonology, we call it possession or partial possession, where the phenomenon has the ability to hijack the observer effect. What? Right? Where again, it's controlling the variable of once you consciously connect to it, it will control what it collapses into. What it
Wow.
collapses into. That is wild stuff. And so that's the kind of mechanics that I and others are focused on now because we're beyond the archetypes. We're beyond what our eyes can see, and it's time to actually test them. And that's what I'm looking forward to doing.
Wow. Oh, do you think that I mean, I would imagine this is just if I was a spirit or whatever it is that couldn't
Yeah.
materialize, maybe to experience the world. I would imagine that they're looking for real physical bodies or
Yeah.
the ability to be able to sense things and maybe feel things in this world. And do you think that's what they're ultimately after, the ability to actually
Yes.
live again?
To a degree, yeah, I do believe they have what I've called disability of being. Their pathology throughout history has always been centered around having a fixed form,
Mhm.
not just a form, not any form, but a fixed form. This is why in idolatry they would create statues in their images, because they believed that the statue, by the way, in biblical antiquity, they also were called souls, that the statue itself was the external soul or the externalization of the soul. And so in early idolatry, it was believed that when you're worshiping the statue, you're worshiping the entity possessing it.
Mm.
So they've always wanted fixed form. But to your point, I was having a amazing conversation with a dear friend of mine now in Brazil, and we've been getting closer and closer in the research. Great, great guy, great researcher. We're talking about this concept of hybridism. And Fritz Kramer was one of the very, I guess not the very first, one of the most profound anthropologists to discuss this concept of possession. And in his book, the Red Fez, he's in Africa and he is being guided through different villages, and he goes into this clearing, and there's a group of people in a circle, and he finds this individual in the middle of the circle near the fire, and he's dancing. He's almost in a trance. He is in a trance, and he's cutting his flesh. Now he's in Africa, but it looked like they'd taken ash and just put ash all over the body. He did as well. He was putting ash on himself. But he almost looked inhuman because of the scar tissue. And he asked the guide, he said, "What is that priest doing?" He said, "Well, the priest is now possessed by our ancestors." And he said that ancestor is now making the priest in its image. And so when we're dealing with this, again, I'm going to use my friend's concept here. We're dealing with possession. Possession to us is a form of pregnancy to them. It's the way they self-replicate their species. So within that understanding, we need to have a better grasp of what hybridism is. Hybridism is being presented as elevating our consciousness to make us more like them. I don't believe that's the case. I believe it's making them more like us. And there's this hand in hand symbiotic relationship between us and the phenomenon. And so that's when you get into what real hybridism represents to us as a species, not as it has been taught to us by ufology, but hybridism, according to the earliest texts, included an entity that was not having children to replicate his species. He was having children to replicate himself. So within hybridism, even the 16th century, you had incubi entities who were impregnating women through dream demonology and dream trances. And these experiencers were not just pregnant by the entity, they were pregnant with it, to where that entity had created another biological avatar. And so that's what we need to understand, first of all, about idolatry. They possessed images long before they possessed people. Now they're possessing people. And I think it's to your point, not so that we can become like them, so that they can become like us.
Yeah. To experience things again and be able to do all that. I mean, it seems
Yeah.
like too that you talked about basically the shape shifting aspects of these things to be able to
Mhm.
manifest inside somebody and shift into something else. And I've been aware of a lot of people's research, and I've never um, gone hunting for Bigfoot or gone hunting for Dogman. But when
Mhm.
it looks like the people that I know that research this, they've experienced something there. And I even
Yeah.
interviewed a guy who claims to have been basically Illuminati to that extent of going through
Mhm.
all the different degrees of all of these different religions to kind of make himself there. And he talks about the werewolvism, how when these people get possessed, they actually literally do turn into
Mhm.
werewolves. So you're saying that like through your research, you're finding this to be actually correct.
Yeah, it's either a physiological change or it's changing our perception of the entity, one of the two. And I'm not sure which one of them it is at this point. But yeah, the phenomenon again can take any form it wishes to, and that's why even with ufology now, I'm questioning, right? What is this light phenomena? I mean, again, getting back to the pre-archetype manifestation, what is it before it creates the physiological construct, right? What is the phenomena before it's the ghost or the hybrid even, or not the hybrid, the cryptid and UFO? It seems to be these corpuscular balls of light that are self-illuminating. They float around homes. They can project an apparition and virtually become, in our eyes, whatever we would want it to. And that's the issue, is that whatever we're dealing with, it enjoys diversifying its identity. And I do believe there are reasons for that. And to that extent, if in fact these physiological constructs do not exist, like they're not real. I mean, they're real to us as much as they can be. But if they're just a projection of a ball of light, and we have been studying the apparition, right? Oh man, that means there's right. Oh, that's Betty, that's old Betty, that's Aunt Betty. We start creating fields of research, lecture series on apparitional theory, not realizing that they may not be real. It's the archetype. What's the pre-archetype? It appears to be, no pun intended, these corpuscular balls of light. They're everywhere. And unfortunately, they're so highly deceptive now that they can not just become anthropomorphic, um, they could do a lot of things. They can implant um, different EVP messages on a technology recorders. The orb flies over and they get an EVP, something it's projecting a voice into the recorder. And then even with Barry and Steve's research, they had that happen. They took it and they analyzed it because Steve has I think a master's degree in acoustics. They realized that these were not human voices. It was the phenomenon mimicking to the best of its ability human voices. And so my point here for everybody that's going to be watching this is that if we have fallen for the archetype, if we've fallen for the trick and the illusion, we would say, okay, yeah, those are humans that are talking to me on these EVPs, but they're not. It's the byproduct of the pre-archetype. And so if we take all of their abilities, put it all on the table and say, okay, most cases, what are we seeing before we actually see UAP? A lot of this is light phenomena. A lot of it is. And so that, I mean, there's a book being written now about it. There's going to be a lot more research coming out regarding this subject matter. But I do believe in many cases we are being manipulated, highly manipulated. And we need to understand that we can also be manipulated again by the phenomenon. And it's kind of like, let's hold our horses and just look at the data.
Yeah, it seems that way, and even if you think of it as light, light is has its own frequency as well,
Yeah.
and so it doesn't seem outside of even the scientific realm of what people are doing today to believe that this is the truth. I mean, to me, it seems that if the technology that we have as consumers is anywhere close to what they have, which I don't believe it's close, I believe that there's more technology out
Right.
there that we're probably not able to get our hands on or maybe even understand. Because I mean, you look at something like a microchip, you can zoom in on those things, and it's just,
Mhm.
as a person that did tool and die work and microscopic things, we have to, our tolerance levels are for metal and all these different things are super microscopic. Even looking at those things, I think, how can a human possibly
Yeah.
manifest one of these things in with using tools, modern tools, or any kind of tools that I can even think of? And it just makes me wonder, like, how much of these tools that we have aren't
Mhm.
actually manifested by this AI. Maybe this was the reason AI um, has been introduced so heavily, and we're spending trillions of
Yeah.
dollars on server space and stuff, is so that they can manifest themselves exactly what they need
Mhm.
to physically manifest in a way that's tangible. I don't know. This is all To me, it's just a big rabbit hole that I've looked down, and I'm like, man, like AI seems like it may be actually more ancient. Maybe AI stands for ancient intelligence rather than
Yeah,
artificial.
I don't believe it's artificial.
I want to give a shout out today to Nano Extreme Pain Cream. It's a pain cream that actually works. It actually goes through all 7 layers of your skin to get to the chronic pain very quickly. I love using it because I like to do things like jujitsu, bowling, and things that at my age sometimes hurt for long periods of time, but this actually works. And so, guys, I wouldn't promote it if I didn't believe in it. So there's an affiliate link in the description. You also get an $8 off coupon, or you get free shipping. So you let you be the judge, let you check. Let me know what you guys think.
This phenomenon likes to inhabit images. It likes to inhabit imaginations. And even if we believe we constructed these robots for, right, for them to inhabit our teachings, our traditions, whatever data we upload, it's never been the case. I mean, even the skull experiment, even with interface events, what the phenomenon will do, it will allow us to upload intention in images. It'll go through the archive of our imagery and say, okay, I'll be that, whatever. And so we do have access and we have the ability to control the interface. Oh, it's AI, but not the content. That's the same thing with interface events throughout all of history. Even to the point now where people are suggesting, to their own demise, mind you, that we are responsible for the phenomenon's response to us. I do not believe that at all. And again, the phenomenon likes to masquerade as that. I'll manifest, oh, I'm part of you. Sure. You created me. You're my creator. No. This gets back to the idea of an egregore or a tulpa. One of the most ancient concepts of an idol and even demonology was if you had a demon in your home, you would go out, not go to a god, you would go to a worse demon. You would go to an artificer of metal and say, hey, listen, I have an image in my head. I want you to create this image that I have in my head. Well, who gave you that image for them to create? They did. And so that entity would go home with them, would go home in the statue in the middle of the night. This is the theory. It would leave the statue it was in. And now you have a worse haunting in your house. And so my point, though, is there is this kind of idea that sure, it's a thought form, but who is forming the thought that becomes the thought form? It's that illusion of control. And I think that's really what we're dealing with now. We're okay, as long as we create AI, we can control it. And what we're realizing now over and over again is that's not true. And what concerns me is this people like Peter Thiel, who is going around giving lectures on the Antichrist, bringing in biblical eschatology, and then slipping in things like if you don't embrace the age of AI, you are a part of the Antichrist movement. Sure. No, we have concerns, but that raises my concerns 10 times because why is it that important? And I do believe there are some less biblical, more geopolitical reasons they believe that. Not to get too much into geopolitics here, but yeah, there is a race for AI because if our enemies get AI to an extent, um, they're going to own the sky. They're going to own everything. So I do get that perspective. I just don't like it being mixed with biblical eschatology. But so, there's a lot there. I just think that right now, my colleagues and I are doing number one is looking at the data and trying to understand what's actually going on when we're interfacing with the phenomenon. That's really what it's all about.
And in your research that you've done and your experiences that you've had with this, what is the most damning bit of evidence, I guess you could say, towards what you're saying being a reality?
Well, damning evidence. Well, number one, we need to get the elephant in the room is this, that Christians cannot be abducted. And that's not true. Um, and that's number one. Betty Luca was abducted. Her entire family was abducted. They put her family in suspended animation. Boop. They're just looking at her. Took her. Um, The second thing, and this is something I want to address because people are emailing me about it. I have never said the name of Jesus doesn't work. What I've said is not enough. There is a reason for that because there's a movement in the field now that just wants to say, okay, just say the name, everything's fine. Now, if that is correct, the seven sons of Sceva should have been 100% successful. They weren't because the name had to be rooted with the personal relationship with the person it belonged to.
Yeah.
And so what we're realizing again is there's people in the field that are like, okay, that's phenomenal, and we need to do that. I agree, that's fine, but not to the extent that we convince people that nothing matters, nothing else, lifestyle doesn't matter, name it and claim it, because that actually does more damage than good, in my opinion. Because we're not promoting a relationship, we're just promoting a name it and claim it theology. And what ends up happening, and I know this by experience, there are people in the field, and I've talked to them, who've never had a relationship but claimed it. And the same response occurs to them worse. It's like, oh, yeah, who are you?
Yeah.
It's 10 times worse. And so there is this kind of, we need to understand that, and I'm very worried, very much worried about that narrative where it's not rooted in the person who the name belongs to. It's just that's the name, and that's not true. And so I think that does make up for the times when it doesn't work. But there's a deeper aspect we need to pay attention to, and that is that yes, there is a scientific nuance to all of this, and
Absolutely. Yeah.
we're
Go
trying to
ahead.
understand where that's coming from.
Yeah, and when you talk about that as well, and I'm totally on board with what you're saying with that because there have like I've been involved in experiences myself and where people were, a person who's clearly has something very, very wrong. I'm talking about to
Yeah,
the point where they're dragging their face on the ground, scuffing their face up, growling like a bear or something, and scuffing their knees in the ground. And people are calling on the name of Jesus to rebuke this thing or get it out of there, and it's not working. And the Bible does clearly say too that like when you come in the name of Jesus, when I think of that, I think of like an authority, like I come in the name of the King. Like if you came in the name of the King, that
yeah,
means that you have authority from that King to come and do that. And I just don't believe that most people have that authority because they don't really have a relationship with the Jesus and have the Holy Spirit or any of those things. But
yeah,
at the same time, I think that you're right. There are a lot of people telling people that this is going to work for them, like it's a magic charm or something, like
yeah.
a magic name that's going to actually do something in the face of some entity that knows that. Like you're the perfect example, the Sons of Sceva. That was a
Yeah.
perfect
Who are
example.
you? Who are
Yeah,
you? Paul, I know. Why? Because Paul knows Jesus. Jesus, I know, but because Jesus is Jesus. Who are you? Well, I adjure you by the name. No. See, here's the problem again, and this is kind of a sore spot with me because I grew up studying the prophetic gift and the deliverance ministry. One of my I guess one of my heroes in that field is Jonathan Suber, and Jonathan Suber has a teaching. It's profound, and he goes, "Look, sure you have the faith. Do you have the consecration? If the consecration's not there, it doesn't really matter how much faith you have. So you have to bottle both of them together, and so that's what I'm worried about. Again, is that you know this convincing people don't you have not don't even worry about the other half that actually is the foundation to build this
hmm
invocation, right? That seems to be more neglected than it is embraced, and I think that even people with good intentions and doing it for the right reasons, if that is not understood or even emphasized, you have a lot of people that are going to lose a lot of faith because they were convinced it would work every time, every time. And we know that's not the case. And so that's kind of where I'm at with that. And I feel bad for even mentioning it now. I feel guilty. But, people need to understand that. But whatever we're dealing with, again, it will bait our gaze, it will seek to be seen, and it does feed into our beliefs.
hmm
So we have to, as a species, we have to understand that before we even want to interface with it. Not that we should,
Yeah,
but
and I agree with you about there's a certain kind of faith out there that seems to be like a almost like a Christian nationalist kind of faith that
yeah,
is different than what the Bible speaks of. And of course, throughout time, people that believe that you can attain a personal relationship with God
Mhm.
yourself without anybody over you other than, Christ or whatever, the anointed one. And that that to me has been detrimental, and it's going to be the cause of a lot of people, I think, being really deceived by what you're talking about here. I'm talking about there's no way out of it. They cannot not be deceived when this is the level of ability that the
Oh,
enemy
right.
has.
Oh, absolutely. And people will say, Nathaniel, you're just what have I been accused of? Just worshiping, or not even worshiping, but making it bigger than they are, making them more powerful. And it's like, no, I'm not. I'm trying to be real with people about the data. If they refuse to hear the data, they're going to be victimized by this phenomenon. They're going to be the first people targeted by it because they refuse to say, okay, this sounds kind of like, what other people are experiencing. So that is something that I'm passionate about. But whatever we're dealing with, it's highly manipulative. And I think it's high time that we remove the mask and say, okay, here's just how bad it can be.
What is the craziest experience? I guess when I say
Oh
craziest,
gosh.
maybe the yeah, crazy, frightening, etc. Like,
Oh
what
my
is that
God.
experience?
So two things really unnerve me. Number one, it's the triggering of bilocation within individuals. Um, a lot of our pilots in the sky, whenever they've encountered UAPs, they've actually been separated from their body, either in the cockpit or in their personal quarters, where they're actually out of their body looking at it. Weird, very strange stuff. Not just that, but we have experiencers who, again, and this is something, if we assume it's not our perception or their perception of the phenomenon, it actually happened, then reality itself was paused. And we've heard again the same mechanism being employed in cryptozoology with Bigfoot, right? We go there, we're in the woods or something, and we hear crickets and birds singing, the woodpecker on the tree. Nothing. It's eerily silent. It paused everything, and now you're like, oh my God. So that really creeps me out. Not just that, but the fact the phenomenon has the ability to recreate memories, or right to where it does what it wants to with certain people, and they'll never realize it. They won't even remember it. And then 50 years later, again, because the body never forgets, it'll start to tell the story their mind doesn't recognize anymore. And then they have to go to therapy, and you start to hear the really, really bad parts of the phenomenon. So that's what creeps me out. I do have a story that, it really, really unnerves me. A dear friend of mine in New England is a researcher, an investigator, and he used to do cleansings and malevolent hauntings just for, you know, a case study instead of my theory. He was a kid, and he's like, "Have you ever heard my origin story?" I said, "No, I haven't." He's like, "Well," he goes, "I was a very sickly child." And he said, I would have to stay out from school. I would be sick. My mother would fix me soup. And he's like, it would be on for months at a time. He's like, my worst bout with the sickness, I'm in bed. And he said, I woke up. I wake up to an entity in the corner of my room staring at me. And he's like, I was paralyzed in fear. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't scream. I just didn't know how to react. He said, and I felt this intelligent electricity move through my body. And he said, now I'm hovering above it. He's like, so here I am as a child staring at myself. I'm looking at the ceiling, looking around. He said, that's when I realized, oh, there was an entity in here. There's something in my room. And he goes, and I look for the entity. It's no longer in the room. He said, where's this? Where'd it go? It's in my living room. Oh my God, it's after my mother. He said, that's when he looked down at his body, and now he realized where it was. It was in his body. And now his body's moving around, looking around. And he said, in a fleeting moment, he said he's looking down at his face as his head raises. And now he's looking into his own eyes. So there are cases where mm, just saying, okay, that's an unclean spirit, not enough. again, that not that that's not what we're dealing with, but I think that again, we're dealing with a 3,000 year old, right? That it was true. It is true. 3,000 years later, have they evolved? What have they learned about us? How are they weaponizing what they've learned about us? That's where I'm at with the research. And people, again, they get really confused in my worldview and my position. Look, I'm after the data. I'm after the data. And the data does support a lot of our worldview. But I guess that's where I'm at, buddy. That's a pretty creepy story in it.
Yeah, it's crazy,
It's
man.
weird, man. Freak
Yeah,
me
bro.
out.
And it's hard, like when people say that's hard to believe. I have to say that very close to what your friend experiences
Hmm.
is something that I've experienced as an adult, and this was around 2011. But this, so I do believe in this kind of thing. You don't have to convince me, but I
Hmm.
do respect your opinion on being able to look at the data and then go with that
Yeah.
because ultimately we the Bible has so much information in it, but it leaves certain topics like I would say I wouldn't say vague, maybe easy to misunderstand, easy to not
Yeah.
understand what's going on with all of that. I really do believe that, and um, at the same time, like people expect us to fit into a certain box of doctrine or theology all the time when ultimately I think that a lot of this stuff is worth considering anyway. And
Yeah.
just, I mean, just in the whole Christian realm in general, I've been involved in the Christian side of things for
Hmm.
many, many years, still to this day. But like even when I was younger, I was in the church and I wasn't really a believer or none of that. You know, I had crazy experiences, but
Hmm.
um, in this realm, I've realized that most people really don't move past what it means to believe in Jesus, and they don't realize that there's literally a whole book that talks about our job as believers in the order of
Yeah.
Melchizedek, right? And this idea of being priests
Yeah.
here on earth versus just being a person that goes to a constructed business of church and
Hmm.
listens to some guy that gets paid to be up there and speak for 15 minutes. And there's a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding of the scriptures in general. I've spent like at least a decade of my life just heavily researching, and I do believe that a lot of this stuff is technology, and how do
Yeah.
you rebuke technology? How do you rebuke that? And
Right.
that's the thing that I think about, and I'm like, man, this is going somewhere that I don't really understand, and I'm definitely interested in hearing from people like you. That's why I had you
Yeah.
on,
Thank you,
because
sir.
I want to know more about what we're experiencing here. Because, like you said, there's no defense against something you don't understand. And right now, I
No.
just feel like I there's everybody misunderstands this.
Well, it's one thing to say, okay, that's a Dodge Charger. Nathaniel, just call it a Dodge Charger. It's another thing to get in the engine,
Yeah.
right? Do an oil test, look at it. Okay, how much horsepower? And look at the mechanics of it. Because believe it or not, again, this intelligence operates off of frequencies and mechanics. And that's what we're realizing. It hates iron. It hates iron. I just found a lecture from a famous occultist who says the same thing about some of these entities. They hate iron. They can't stand. So again, if we look at it outside of some of the very, very restrictive lenses, and we say, okay, are we allowed to research this? Number one, because I've been told that too, right? You're into demonology. And they don't get that. A lot of people don't get that demonology is not demonolatry. That's, English language. One is worship, the other one's research.
Yeah.
And so my point though is in order for us to get a better understanding of what we're dealing with, this is the kind of research that has to be done by certain people, not by everybody. And I'm not wanting that to happen. I'm not saying go out and do this. I'm saying that, this is what I feel called to do. This is what I have a passion to do. And it's okay if I misunderstood. I'll embrace that as long as the data is released and our species understands about the profound manipulation that's occurring.
Yeah, I agree. I think the job biblically that says that the Holy Spirit will guide us into all truth, and I think this is
Yeah.
a lifelong pursuit. Things will be put in front of our face in order for us to be able to see what these things are. And so I appreciate you being a part of that process in this Pounders quest, my quest for truth, more truth. I feel like I have the truth, but I feel like there's more to everything out there. And
Mhm.
so I'm excited to do this, man. I appreciate it. Tell people
Thank you.
about your YouTube channel and any links
Yeah.
that they need to know about.
My newest project is called ParaSymposia. I've done hundreds of interviews, lectures, and people have wanted to find my work in one location. Just want to go to one place. That's it. So I'm accommodating their request, and I've created my own platform. That's where everybody can find, which they will be able to once it's released. All of my research, my lectures, the foundation of Necronetics, what it means to hybridism and its attachment to Nephilim research. That's where it is, parasymposia.com. And if you guys want to look my lectures up or interviews, just look me up on YouTube or subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll have a playlist on there with all of them for you. Thank you for having me on, sir. I really do appreciate it. I know I'm not I don't know, I could be very controversial. I don't intend to be, but I guess that's who I am at this point.
Well, I appreciate it, dude, and I'll definitely want to have you back on because I would
Yeah,
like to ask you more about the experimenting with dead people in order to do some of the stuff that's interesting to me as well.
yeah,
Because I'm not that I want to get into all of the dark things about the
hmm,
earth, but to understand why this is even a practice is really interesting to me. So we'll have to talk again, man. I
yeah.
appreciate you coming on. And guys, make sure you pound the like button, pound the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you, Nathaniel.